Hey, good morning, everybody. So my name is Freja, and as Pirjo told you, I'm an architect at JKMM Architects, and also my background is in research. Yes, so Esa sent me a topic for today's talk, and it was Finnish school design trends. Well, I added the word contemporary to it because I will be talking about school buildings of today in Finland. And then I added this subtitle, Tomorrow's Heritage, ? And I took that from, there's a big Japanese building corporation, which they have a slogan that is, today's work is tomorrow's heritage. So I was thinking that, well, are the school buildings we have designed and built today, will they be considered heritage for tomorrow? And that's something that we have been looking into in our research project. Well, I think, and also a part of the JKMM design philosophy is that we should depart from the client. We should design for the users. And well, of course, the user of a learning environment is a child, or so we think. A student, a teenager, and then an adult. And I think one of the megatrends today is to think that learning is a lifelong process. So it doesn't end when you come out of school, then you go to universities, and you even learn when you go to an elderly home, as here in this picture from a Japanese nursing home. Yeah, learning calligraphy. And well, at JKMM, we have been designing buildings for all of the learning stages in life. The Leipuri Daycare Center was one of the first buildings of the office. It's a very small daycare center located in Myllipuro, Helsinki. It has 4 daycare units and approximately 84 children. And what's special for this building is that you enter it through this kind of a nozzle-like entrance. You go up through this wooden part. And this was done in order to make the architecture very experimental. We wanted to give the child a special experience when entering the building. So we wanted to have the child's perspective in the design. And another example is the Saunalahti Children's House. It's located in Espoo, not far from here. It was completed in 2011. And well, it's a bit bigger, it's for 5 units. And what's special about the building is that it's an example of one design trend of today, and that is to combine different functions in the learning environment. So here we have a daycare center for young children, but we also have a maternity clinic and a health center for children, for the community that live around the Saunalahti area. So that's what is done today. And in the Saunalahti building, in fact, you enter the daycare premises from this kind of a courtyard, which is quite high from the street level. And here, the children have this kind of an own universe up on the courtyard. It was the landscape design was made by Loki Architects. And then we have the Kalasatama School, which is located in Helsinki. It's an example of another design trend of today, and that is not to build any more separate buildings for elementary school and high school. We put all together so that they form this kind of a bigger school compound. So in the Kalasatama School, we have a daycare center for 100 with 11 units, so it's even bigger than the Saunalahti and the Leipuri. And then we have the school building, and I'll tell you more about the school building later on here. in the presentation. And well, the Saunalahti school, it's built around the edges of the plot, and it creates this kind of an semi-closed courtyard for the children, which is quite protected. And then we have also designed university buildings. One recent one is the University of the Arts in Kallio. And it's also an example of a trend, and that is to have not only a university building, but to have a lot of different functions embedded in the same building. So we have learning spaces, workshops, a restaurant, cafes on the different levels of the building, for example, and a library. And well, what's particular, and which is now a trend in design in general, is to reuse buildings. So the University of the Arts is made as an extension of existing buildings. So we don't want to tear down the old buildings, and we want to have our own footprint as small as possible. And here the students have been able to quite freely shape themselves this kind of a rough industrial-like building. And then in the center of Helsinki, we have the Think Corner. And here what's particular is that we combine university functions with business. So we have office buildings, for example, the reproductor company's buildings. And then we have this very active university hub building with a lot of activities for both the university, but also for the companies. And it's also a reused building. So it's the extension of an existing office building. Well, then learning, it doesn't happen only in a designated learning environment. It happens in a lot of different places and a lot of different public buildings. And here the libraries have a quite important and also traditional role in the Finnish society to be learning environments. The Kirkkonummi Library is a quite recent project by the JKMM. And here again, it was an extension of an old building. So I think this is what's in fact dominating design and building of today, is that we reuse old buildings. And then of course, learning happens in other places, like for example, outdoors in the urban place, and or in museums, as in the Amos Rex Museum. So public buildings have a very important function in the education of us all. And well, then in 2020, JKMM participated in this research project named CREDU. It's a quite difficult name, creating novel technologies of scalable and empowering learning. So it was a business consortium funded by Business Finland, where we had 2 universities, the Helsinki University and the Jyväskylä University, and then we had 6 companies, and JKMM was one of these 6 companies. And the companies, they all looked at learning processes from different angles. So we were the only architects in the project. And now I'll tell you some about the findings and the work that we did within this CREDO project. And we had a quite big team at the office of both architects and interior architects and graphic designers. And all in all, I think we were 9 persons involved in this CREDO project. And well, our main research question that we wanted to investigate was that how does architecture influence learning, and can we affect learning outcomes, or do we affect the well-being of users, and if we do, how, and what is in fact an optimal learning environment. And then we have this different line of questioning where we looked at if there is a correlation between physical and virtual environments. Well, our research methods included, of course, background literature reviews and analysis of architectural competition that Pirja mentioned here in the beginning. And then we did a quite big survey of recent daycare and school buildings in Finland. In fact, we looked at all the published school buildings during the last 20 years. Then based on this, we were involved in 2 research projects within the project. One had to do with daycare buildings, where we went to 5 different daycare buildings, and then we did a lot of interviews with the users, and we tested this kind of a walkthrough method in these daycare buildings. And then the second big research project within the Credo for us was we called it Tutkimusmatka kouluun. I translated it to expedition school. Well, there we went to 5 recent school buildings in Finland, and we did field work together with the students and the teachers, and then we analyzed the buildings. And then I put in gray 2 of the projects, sub-projects that we weren't in fact able to do or finish within the Credo project. And one was to study the effects of architectural features on concentration abilities. This was supposed to be done together with the Helsinki University as a kind of a cognitive test where the students were or took part in this kind of visual and audio stimuli, and then we were supposed to test how it affected their cognitive abilities. But there were some technical problems involved, and then we ran out of time. And another which we did not fulfill was this correlation between the physical and the virtual environment. It was supposed to be based on the same methods as the number 4, but so that we would test the same audio and visual stimuli in the virtual world with this app. But there was also some technical problem. I think we will perhaps return to that in the future, or I hope so. The expedition school project, there, well, we analyzed the buildings and their functions. And then we did this field work to 5 different schools. Here you can see pictures of the schools. There were 2 school buildings in Helsinki, the Jätkäsaari school, and then the Kalasatama school, which we had designed ourselves. And then we had 1 school, very big wooden school in Imatra, the Mansikkala school, you see up there in the corner. And then we have had the Talvikangas koulu in Oulu, and then Syvälahden koulu in Turku. And in these schools, we did this, we call it an experts walkthrough. It's a research method that's normally used in connection to this post-occupancy evaluation method. But we did it in this kind of limited manner together with the staff in the schools. So we had teachers, administrational staff, and then our own team, which was composed of educational researchers and psychologists, and then ourselves. And then we developed ourselves this method for involving the students. And we had 87 students that participated in these schools. And then we did some thematic interviews, and also together with the Helsinki University, this sensory online survey among staff. But the research methods that we developed in our group, in fact, we had the situation that we were suddenly in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and we couldn't go to the schools. So we had 1 year when we couldn't do field work, so we developed this model instead, or this method. And we we divided the students in the schools into very small groups. There were 4 to 6 people in a group, together with researchers. And then we went into different types of spaces, so that we looked at an open classroom, and then an open learning unit, the green area, and then the kind of common area for the whole school. And in these spaces, the students were asked to react on the environment, so that they got 6 cards. They had different, you can see them in the picture. There are 4 action cards, so that there were 1 where you do individual work, group work, listen to a lesson, or listening to teaching. And then the 4th one was hang around. And then we had a red and a green card, where the red card symbolized, of course, something not very nice, and the green something good, that is a good place. And then the students, their task was to place these cards in the spaces, and we recorded the discussions, and then we of course kind of recorded the location of the cards. So in that sense, we learned how they used the spaces, what they did in the spaces, and what they felt about the different parts of the room. This is from the Jätkäsaari school, and there is 1 classroom. It's very narrow, and it's very long. And well, the furniture is quite terrible. They don't have chairs. They have this kind of a small seats, soft seats, and no proper tables. And then the teacher normally stands here. And then the students, well, they are forced to be kind of everywhere in the room because there are so many. So from here, you can't see what the teacher is teaching. They have quite small screens, and you can't hear it either. So, well, that's what the students told us. They didn't like the space quite. And I've heard from the architects that that in fact it wasn't meant to be a classroom. It was this kind of a teacher's room, so that the teachers could enter from both ends of the space, and it was this kind of a multi-purpose room. But, and I think this is quite often nowadays, that we design buildings where we think that the room spaces are very flexible, and then we adjust our activities to it. But in fact, here there are so many students, so they have to occupy all the spaces for the classrooms. And I think this has happened in many of the schools that we visited, that for example, common lobbies, they are then suddenly used by 2 classrooms at the same time, because there isn't enough individual rooms for the classes. So I think that's kind of it's a drawback of having 2 small buildings with 2 small little spaces. Well, here are some of the buildings that we analyzed for the study. And well, I mentioned already the trends of today, that is to have big school units with which are efficient. When we think about staff, the staff can kind of easily be taken or work in different parts of the building if needed. If there is a shortage of staff, for example, and it's spatial efficiency, it's cheaper to build big units. Then there is also this idea of the school building to be a safe place when the student advances from the daycare to the elementary school and then up to the higher grades. So in that sense, they are familiar with the physical environment and they don't need to switch schools. This is good, of course, if you like your school, but if you don't like it, then you're stuck in the same building for a long time. Well, then another thing that we found that influences the spaces is then the curriculum. We have this phenomenon-based teaching where different phenomena is taught in different subjects during the same kind of period of time. So that affects how the spaces are used. For example, so that you need bigger spaces when you start a new phenomena. Then you want to gather several classes in the same of the same year, so that you can tell them introduce the new phenomena to everybody at the same time. So you have a need to have a space for 100 square meters when all the, for example, fourth graders can assemble and start a new phenomena. And also the teaching methods of today vary quite a lot, so that you will see it in the pictures later on, so that the students have the possibility to be elsewhere than in the classroom. They go to the lobby and they sit in sofas and they do some tasks there. And then they go back to the classroom and continue with the teacher, for example. So in fact, one trend is that the learning doesn't happen only in the classroom. It happens everywhere in the learning environment and outside. Well, then we looked at the typologies of the school buildings, and we found 4 different types of how to arrange the spaces and the circulation of spaces in the building. So we have the courtyard plan, where the spaces gather around this kind of an atrium space, or then we have so the courtyard can be closed or it can be open. And then we had the block plan, where the distribution of spaces can be along a street, which then leads to the different spaces. Or the distribution can be around an atrium. And then we found the cluster plan, where we have kind of this centralized distribution of spaces, or what do you call it, logistic to the spaces. And then the different learning spaces are gathered either around a main atria or in a linear manner. And then the campus plan, which can be like a town, a very densely built mix of functions, or then as physically separate blocks. And then we analyzed the buildings that we selected, or in fact, we selected buildings that would fit into different categories of the typology. And the buildings that we studied more closely, they were the Kalasatama School. It's like an open plan. The Jätkäsaari School is a very good example of an atrium school. And then we have the Talvikangas School, where the spaces are arranged along a street. And the street is a kind of a central lobby for the classrooms. And then the Mansikkala School, it resembled a town where the spaces, the classroom, they are really densely mixed. And then the Syvälahti School is a very typical atrial cluster example. And we also analyzed the space typologies. So in the more traditional schools, we have classroom-based layout where the classrooms are quite closed spaces. I went to school in the 80s. In the 90s, there were quite a lot of classroom-based schools layout at that time. But now we have, in fact, most of the schools we looked at, they are this kind of a hybrid type, where we have closed classrooms, but then we have quite a lot of this kind of learning lobby space. And also the learning and teaching happens in this lobby space. And then we have some examples of this open layout, where there are very little classrooms and very big common spaces. Well, I'll just briefly show you the buildings that we investigated. We have the Jätkäsaari School, designed by the AOR Architects, and it's quite a compact building. It's 2 to 3 floors. It's aimed for 800 students with the grades 1 to 9. And okay, I see that they're not colored. or the colors are not visible in the floor plan. Something happens here, but this was the most open example, so that you have, but the classrooms, they are here along the facades, but then also there are quite open areas where there is both teaching and kind of this individual education taking place. And then in the middle, we have the atrium with a dining hall on the ground floor. And well, yes, then the Kalasatama school, it's for around 700 students, grades 1 to 9, plus daycare center. And it's also on 3 floors, depending on where you are in the building. Yeah, something happens with the color, quite strange in the presentation. Well, the units are like this, so you have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and there you have 4 to 5 classes that share this kind of a one teaching learning unit. And then in the middle here, we have the common spaces for the whole building. And the Talvikangas school was designed by M3 Architects from Oulu. It's also quite big. It's for 550 students. There are grades from 1 to 9, and then also this kind of local community spaces where people can come from the surrounding. And well, as we saw in the previous slides, the spaces are arranged around this kind of a central street here. And then the classrooms are along the facade. And they're quite open with glass walls towards the central space. And the central space is used by all the classrooms so that they agree, the teachers agree on when which class can use the central space. And they were quite happy with the building, or how it functioned, in fact. In the beginning, it was quite experimental, so that they built, there were no walls between the classrooms and the central space. So these were only curtains. And there were these very short walls here. So even the classrooms were kind of physically very open. And they tried to have a school in the building for the first year. And then they realized that they can't manage it. Of course, if you have 8 classrooms with no walls, you can imagine how much noise there is. And so they build glass walls. Well, yes, you can see here in the picture. Here we have the lobby, or the learning lobby of each floor, and then the classrooms with the glass walls towards the lobby. And then the Mansikkala school, it was the biggest of all the schools we studied. It's for 1,350 students. We have the grades 1 to 9, but also upper secondary school, daycare center, student health services, maternity health clinic. So really a lot of things happening there. And it's big, 14,000 square meters. And here, well, you can't see it here in the picture actually, but what happened here was that they had quite a lot of, in the beginning, they had quite a lot of this kind of common lobby areas, which was supposed to be, as in the Talvikangas school, this kind of a open learning lobby. But then they have so many students, so big pressure to have classrooms, that they in fact split they have some classes, they have teaching in this lobby as permanently with no windows outside and like hundreds of students passing by every day. And then in some cases, as you can see here, I mean, it looks quite, looks like a grid full of small space, and that's what it is, so that walk through one classroom to get to the next classroom. So there's a lot of traffic in the building, and well, I suppose one solution, or the only solution here, is to have less students in the school. And then, well, the Syvälahti school was the last of the which we studied. It's for 800 students located in Turku. And it has also quite a lot of services outside the school functions. For example, maternity health service. There is a library for the neighborhood and a youth center as well. And here this kind of cluster idea works so that we have a central main space, which is high, where we have the dining hall, and it also functions as this kind of a festive hall. And then we have this, they call it neighborhood, the different parts. So you have, each of the blocks are divided into two, so that you have two learning units per block. And in each learning unit, you have 3 classrooms. As a part of the service, and we did in the study, the students had opportunities to tell what they thought was important in the building, and what was not so good. And well, they liked the feelings of cleanliness and spaciousness and security. And then what was not so good was noisiness and restlessness in the environment. And the staff, again, you see here, it's in Finnish, unfortunately, the graph, but it's just one of many results from the sensory survey that Helsinki University did, and where they had, the staff had the possibility to answer how they felt, what affected their senses or sensory experience of the building. Well, one very much, as I mentioned earlier, one thing that was found disturbing was this kind of walk-through spaces, because of course it kind of creates a break in the teaching and learning. Well, I'll tell you next some of the results from the field work with the students, what they thought during this, when we had this card game with them in the building. We found that the results, we could divide them into 3 different themes. Well, one were features connected to this open learning environment, where the learning environment was, in fact, it was either physically open or visually open. And then another theme which came forth both in the interviews with the staff, but also with the students, was this kind of a idea of ownership. Is the spaces, do you feel that the space is your own with an identity where you can personalize the space, or is it a shared, more generic space? And then, well, the third big theme was then quite kind of perhaps more technical. So it was connected to the size of the space, how many students there were in the space, and then the ergonomy of the classrooms. And well, this is a picture pair where which illustrates these different levels of openness. So the open environment on your left side, you can see it's a typical learning space in the Jätkäsaari school, where we have a big space, which is then divided by a curtain into smaller spaces. And then they have different type of teaching and learning in different parts of this big space. And then here, on your right hand side is then the Talvikangas school, where we have classrooms which are closed off by the glass walls, and then we have the common learning lobby. And then well, I was into it. Here you can see the colors. That's good. I was into it earlier, that they had to make modifications when we look at the extent of openness in the buildings. So we had in the we counted how much did they do modifications. So in the Mansikkala school on the left hand side, they had added walls so that the openness went from being 40% open to 20% open spaces. And in the Talvikangas school, it was even bigger. It went from being 85% to 30% open. Of course, they have the glass walls, so it's visually open, but not physically open. In the Kalasatama, no changes has been done, and the same goes for the Syvälahti school. So they found that in those schools, they have found that the kind of level of open and closeness is quite good for their purpose. And then in the Jätkäsaari school, they plan to add glass walls in some of these very open spaces. Well, then some of the user experiences. The teachers found and the directors of the schools that this concept of openness, it's kind of a symbol for their activities for the school, and they want to be open and they want to be dynamic, and it supports this phenomenon-based curriculum, and it also supports this kind of collaboration between teachers, between classes, and also this kind of open environment. It brings this kind of it affects the work methods by the teachers, so that the teachers collaborate and they have this kind of joint lessons and programs together with the other teachers. And then it brings variation to the students' experiences, so that you can more freely work in different manners. You can have group tasks in this kind of a lobby, sofa-like soft ambience, or then you can have individual work in the classroom. The building has possibilities to give a lot of different qualities to the users. And then with the students, they liked these different qualities. They like to go into the niche. They took a green card and went and sat in the small niche, or they liked, and I think the architects hadn't thought about it, but they liked the very protected corner underneath the staircase, and that's perhaps kind of a contrast to this otherwise quite open space. Was that the students, in fact, they liked the closed, protected spaces. They didn't want to be the whole time somewhere where everybody can see them. So I think that's something that we should learn from, so that we perhaps take into consideration that people need also this kind of a privacy in the building. Well, other popular places where also this provide protected niches. They call this the sauna. It's kind of a small space box in the bigger open space in the Jätkäsaari school. Well, yes, and then a lot of students commented that they liked very soft furniture and not hard chairs, but we were not sure that if they were really serious about it. Some experiences of this open learning environment was that, well, of course, these physically open spaces have a lot of audio stimulation, noise, and it was disturbing. The students found it disturbing when they heard what other groups were doing, or if other groups were walking through their own space. Of course, it kind of made a break in the activities, and also there were often situations where you had 2 classrooms and 2 lessons taking place in the same kind of open space. And of course, that's quite challenging. And other experiences, well, these are also examples of the openness. You have, for example, in the Kalasatama school, where all the 5, there are 5 classrooms in one unit. All the students, they come in and they wash their hands here on your left-hand side. And then at the same time, when we have 25 students washing their hands and going to the classroom, you have a lesson taking place behind the curtain. So you can imagine how much commotion this type of spatial use causes to the school activities. Well, this was quite a popular place in the Talvikangas school. You had the very high back of the sofa, which made this kind of a protected space. And here's some more important spaces in the common learning lobby. Well, when thinking about the visual openness, many students and also the teachers had this notion that when something is visually open, then it's quite safe, because you see what's happening. You can kind of be prepared for what's going to happen next when you see it coming. But then on the other hand, when you have a lot of children in an open space, it can also be difficult to supervise them. There's happening so much that you can't follow it all. And that's what some teachers commented. And then, well, of course, visually open, it can be quite kind of, there's a lot of clarity. You see what's happening next door. You don't have to kind of wonder, oh, what's that noise? You see where it comes from. But at the same time, it can be quite disturbing to have this visual stimulation going on the whole time when you're trying to do your exam, for example. Yeah, I think, well, this thing about safety is, I think one thing is that you can see the bullying happening more easily. But then again, as the teacher said, that there's so much going on that, because there's so many people then in these common spaces, that is still difficult for the teachers to have control of the situation. And also, I mean, it's not one open common space. It's scattered on a larger area. So then you always have this kind of unprotected areas where bullying can happen. And then the students' experiences of this visual openness was that, well, some got used to it very quickly. So it was, and were quite fine with it. They liked it. But then others did not. And they found, in some schools, they had covered the windows with either curtains, or then they put kind of these paper sheets on the glass doors, for example, because they didn't want the neighboring class to look into the classroom. So it's a kind of divided opinion about the openness. The students liked places which were smaller. Here on the right-hand side, they did group tasks in this kind of a smaller group room, and that they liked very much in the Mansikkala school. And here on the left-hand side, the students could, when they had finished the task, they could come and sit here by the window, and they liked that place. Well, yeah, this was kind of a picture to illustrate that that for some students, it was really important to have this quite closed kind of spot in the classroom. For example, they use this kind of a chair with a very high back, or very protected chair, so that it could block out this kind of stimulation. For children, for example, that have difficulties concentrating, this would be a good solution. But then the ownership of space, I think with this phenomenon-based curriculum, it easily leads to a situation where there's a lot of shared spaces, because you need this kind of a bigger space for where all the classes can gather. And then still there is quite a big pressure to have efficient and not too big school buildings. So efficiency thinking go together with shared spaces, and in a shared space, the ownership is not so strong, because you can't kind of modify the space to your needs, because it's, I mean, the next lesson, somebody else will be using it. So it needs to be quite generic, the space. And in the cases where you had, so that one class had their own classroom, then they had the possibility to hang up pictures made by the students. The teacher could put up pictures or teaching material, for example. There was one teacher of history. He said that, oh, he would so like to hang up kind of the history of Finland on the walls. And but he used to do that if he had a fixed room. But in that case, he didn't have a fixed room, so he couldn't do it because there was kind of using the space for a lot of other things. So in this kind of ownership, in fact, affects quite a lot how the spaces are used. And the thing connected to ownership is also that if you change the classroom for every lesson, then the students cannot leave their things into the classroom. They have to have them in lockers, or they carry them around. So it affects how the student kind of functions in the building. And the same goes for the teachers. In some schools where you don't have a fixed room at all, the teacher is in fact carrying along all the teaching equipment from one room to another. Where here you have two situations. The one, the generic, where you could not hang up anything on the walls. And then the fixed rooms where you could put kind of teaching materials on the walls. But in both cases, as you see from the furniture, the students don't bring their stuff in. There is no place in the tables anymore for your books or stuff. You put them in a locker. I think this is well, this has also to do with the fact that students are very different size. So you have some need to have more space underneath the table if they are bigger, and other need less space. So you have the chairs are kind of adjustable, and then you can't have this kind of as we used to have earlier on, this kind of a storage box in the table, because if you hit your knees on it. I think in some, well, they quite often nowadays in the classrooms, they might have a fixed table for some weeks or a month, and then the teacher rearranges the location of the children. I think this has to do with the group dynamic. They often want to do this so that the children get to know each other better in the whole classroom, and also they have quite a lot of different teaching situations nowadays. So you, for example, with these movable tables, you can the next class that comes in, they perhaps are doing a group work, so they arrange the tables, put them together, and sit around a bigger table. So in that way, I think a lot of the teaching and learning is done in this quite dynamic manner. So it's not fixed the place. Well, yes, here you could see that some schools then had, for example, on your left-hand side, they were not supposed to attach to anything on the glass walls, but they did it anyway, because I think it was so strong, this kind of will to have this ownership. You want to put the pictures of that the children has made up so that everybody can see them and the children can see them. It has a very kind of educational function also. Well, here, yeah, here you see a normal locker situation where in the common areas there are lockers where the children put both their bags and their jackets and take off their shoes normally. But then the dimensioning of spaces, I think a lot of comments were that they would need more space in the classroom because there are, well, in those cases where the students, for example, take their bag with them, it takes quite a lot of space. And then when you have the tables quite close to each other, they are in fact so cramped that the teacher can't fit in anymore. So if the teacher tries to go and teach a student that sits in the middle of the row, he or she can't get there physically because there's so much furniture and so much stuff in the way. And also the size of the classrooms varies quite a lot. So it might be 22 one year and 28 the next year. So of course there need to be kind of a more flexibility embedded in the dimensioning of spaces. Well, here you see the long narrow space that we looked at in the floor plan earlier on, where you had the red dots that the students put. So some were sitting here, and there further on you had the teacher. So you can imagine that the dimensioning of the room itself and the shape of the room is quite important, so that all students can hear and see what is taught. And that was, in fact, it sounded quite crazy, but that was kind of a wish of many children, that they would really want to have a classroom where you can see what the teacher is teaching. Because in some of the rooms we visited, the students were forced to kind of sit like this. So you have the teacher there and then you sit here. Or even in the one kind of worst scenario was that you had your back towards teacher. The students had to turn around to properly see something. And well, then the question about ergonomy came forth in many, both from the students and the teachers, that I mean, you need a proper chair and you need a table. And there, in all the schools, they didn't have this for everybody. So there were kind of somewhere these sofa-like chairs with a very small table, and you had two students sharing this very small movable table. And so there, perhaps the kind of a strive to have a very cozy and living room-like ambience in the rooms, it could lead to the fact that the students didn't have furniture that was very ergonomic to, if you want to, for example, write or you want to work with a computer. And then this question about if you can see the teacher. And yeah, well, here you could see an example of a chair that is not so ergonomic. If you have lessons, say 6 hours a day, and you sit on that stool with no back support, which is not adjustable, and so forth. Yeah, the same goes for this one. Here in this classroom, for example, the students sat on these stools, and then there is a desk going all along the facade. In a way, quite nice idea. But of course, if you sit here and work, you have your back to the teaching that's happening in the room. And also, if you're small, you don't necessarily see out from the windows where you're sitting. And there were in this space so many students that they were really sitting quite densely along the table. So there's a big kind of difference between these two situations, where you have your own desk, you have adjustable chairs, and you can see the teacher. Well, now what we have been working on based on these experiences is to think about how this learning unit could be, so that it's flexible for this kind of future situations, where it seemed quite optimal to have units where you have 3 classrooms, and then this kind of a common learning lobby. Then there are not so many students, and the spaces are kind of kept quite calm, and there's not too much commotion in the spaces. So then the number 1 is when you use this unit as home classrooms, so that all the groups have their own proper space. And then the number 2 is so that you have kind of use the common area for a lot of different activities, and not as a home classroom, so that it's used actively by all the groups. Kind of different combinations of these, so that you can have some classrooms have home lessons, and some have this kind of common space together with one of the other classrooms. Well, that was it. Thank you.